August 1943. Sicily. General George Patton has just orchestrated one of the most brilliant campaigns of the war, capturing Palermo and racing to Messina ahead of the British. His name is on the cover of Time and Newsweek. The Germans fear him more than any other Allied commander. But in 2 hospital tents, Patton has committed acts that could end everything. He struck 2 soldiers suffering from combat exhaustion, calling them cowards. Medical officers have filed official reports. The incidents have reached Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower's desk, and they're damning. Under military law, striking a subordinate is a court-martial offense. Congress will demand Patton's removal when they find out. The press corps knows everything and is waiting for permission to publish. Eisenhower sits alone in his headquarters reading the reports, facing an impossible decision. America's most aggressive and successful battlefield commander has just given him every reason to fire him. What Eisenhower said next would determine not just Patton's fate, but the outcome of the war in Europe. The Sicily campaign had been a triumph. In just 37 days, Patton's 7th Army had smashed through determined German and Italian resistance, captured more than 100,000 prisoners, and established once and for all that American forces could match the combat effectiveness of any army in the world. The stigma of Kasserine Pass, where American troops had been routed by Rommel's Afrika Korps just months earlier, had been erased. Patton had proven that aggressive American leadership could achieve spectacular results. The campaign had showcased everything that made Patton exceptional as a combat commander. His instinct for exploitation was unmatched. While British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery ground forward methodically against German defenses in the eastern sector, Patton had seized the initiative in the west. He captured Palermo in a lightning strike that caught the enemy completely unprepared, then wheeled his entire army eastward and raced Montgomery to Messina. The Jingsu to capture Sicily's northeastern port became legendary, with Patton personally driving his commanders to maintain momentum, despite supply difficulties and rugged terrain. More significantly, Patton had demonstrated that American forces could conduct complex combined arms operations with the same skill that had made the German Wehrmacht so formidable. His use of amphibious end runs to outflank German defensive positions showed tactical innovation. His coordination between armor, infantry, artillery, and close air support proved that American commanders had learned the lessons of mobile warfare. By the time Messina fell on August 17th, the Germans knew they faced a dangerous adversary in Patton. Intelligence reports intercepted by Allied codebreakers revealed that German commanders considered Patton the most capable and threatening of all Allied generals. They studied his tactics and anticipated his moves with a respect they afforded no other American commander. This psychological advantage was invaluable. When German planners positioned their best units and allocated reserves, they did so with Patton's potential actions foremost in their calculations. One general had created uncertainty in the minds of the entire German high command. Eisenhower recognized Patton's value completely. In a letter to Army Chief of Staff George Marshall dated August 24th, Eisenhower attributed the success of the Sicily campaign directly to Patton's energy, determination, and unflagging aggressiveness. These were not empty compliments. Eisenhower understood military leadership at the highest levels, and he knew that certain qualities could not be taught or manufactured. Patton possessed an instinctive grasp of mobile warfare, an ability to maintain relentless pressure on the enemy, and a willingness to take calculated risks that more cautious commanders avoided. But Eisenhower also knew Patton's weaknesses intimately. They had served together for years. Eisenhower understood that Patton's brilliance on the battlefield coexisted with severe limitations in judgment, particularly regarding his public behavior and his treatment of subordinates. Patton's diary entries and private letters revealed a man convinced of his own destiny to lead great armies, contemptuous of those he considered weak, and utterly lacking in political sophistication. These traits had created problems before and would create problems again. The slapping incidents represented Patton's flaws at their most destructive. On August 3rd, visiting the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia, Patton encountered Private Charles Kuhl, who appeared physically unwounded. When Kuhl explained he was hospitalized for his nerves and could not take the combat stress, Patton erupted. He slapped the soldier with his gloves, called him a coward, and physically ejected him from the hospital tent. Medical staff watched in shock as their commanding general berated a soldier who was genuinely suffering from what we now understand as post-traumatic stress disorder. 7 days later, Patton repeated the performance at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital near Santo Stefano. Private Paul Bennett, sitting and shivering, told Patton his nerves had given out, and he could not stand the shelling anymore. Patton slapped him twice, then drew his pistol and threatened to shoot him on the spot for cowardice. Medical personnel had to intervene to prevent further escalation. The incident was witnessed by dozens of soldiers and medical staff, ensuring word would spread rapidly through the 7th Army. The medical officers who witnessed the incidents immediately recognized their severity. Colonel Donald Currier, commanding officer of the 93rd Evacuation Hospital, was particularly disturbed by what he had seen. Patton had not just lost his temper. He had physically assaulted patients under medical care and threatened one with lethal violence in front of his staff. Currier filed a detailed report through medical channels to Brigadier General Frederick Blesse, Eisenhower's chief surgeon at Allied Force Headquarters. The report from the August 10th incident was especially damning because it included eyewitness accounts from multiple medical personnel. They described Patton slapping Bennett, cursing him repeatedly, and drawing his ivory-handled pistol while shouting that he should shoot the soldier for cowardice. The witnesses noted that Bennett was genuinely suffering from combat exhaustion and posed no disciplinary problem beyond his inability to continue fighting. Medical staff considered Patton's behavior not just inappropriate but potentially criminal under military law. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Colonel Perrin Long, a medical officer who had investigated both incidents, prepared a comprehensive report titled Mistreatment of Patients in Receiving Tents, dated August 16th. His documentation included medical records showing that Private Cool had been diagnosed with exhaustion multiple times during the campaign, and that his condition was legitimate. Long's report made clear that both soldiers were genuinely suffering from combat fatigue, not malingering or cowardice. Patton had assaulted sick men who deserved medical treatment, not punishment. The WWII Corps surgeon, Colonel Richard Arnest, also filed a report that reached Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, who commanded 2 Corps. Bradley faced a difficult choice. He understood Patton's value as a combat commander and felt personal loyalty to him, but the reports described behavior that violated basic standards of military conduct and human decency. Bradley locked the report in his safe, taking no action beyond ensuring Eisenhower would receive the information through other channels. It was an act of loyalty that bought time but could not suppress the truth indefinitely. General Blesse delivered the consolidated medical reports to Eisenhower on August 16th. The Supreme Commander read them with growing alarm. The incidents were worse than he had initially heard through informal channels. Eisenhower faced a command crisis with profound implications for Allied operations. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, striking a subordinate was a court-martial offense. The witnesses were numerous and credible. If Eisenhower followed regulations, he would have to convene a formal investigation that could only result in Patton's relief from command and possible prosecution. But Eisenhower also understood the strategic situation. The Allied invasion of Italy was scheduled for September. Planning was already underway for Operation Overlord, the cross-channel invasion of France. Both operations would require aggressive, competent commanders capable of conducting complex amphibious operations, followed by rapid exploitation. Patton had just demonstrated exactly those capabilities in Sicily. Removing him from command would deprive the Allies of their most proven practitioner of mobile warfare at a critical moment. Eisenhower sent General Blesse to Sicily with orders to investigate the allegations personally and deliver a letter to Patton. The letter, dated August 17th, was one of the strongest rebukes ever written by one general to another. Eisenhower made his position devastatingly clear. He stated that he understood firm and drastic measures were sometimes necessary to secure military objectives, but this did not excuse brutality, abuse of the sick, or exhibition of uncontrollable temper in front of subordinates. The letter's most significant passage questioned whether Patton possessed the judgment and self-discipline necessary for continued high command. Eisenhower wrote that if there was substantial truth to the allegations, he must so seriously question Patton's good judgment and self-discipline as to raise serious doubts about his future usefulness. This was not bureaucratic language. It was a direct statement that Patton's career hung in the balance. Eisenhower noted that the personal services Patton had rendered to the United States and the Allied cause were of incalculable value, but even this could not excuse what had occurred. The implication was clear. One more incident, and Patton was finished. Critically, Eisenhower informed Patton that no formal record of the incidents would be kept at Allied headquarters except in his personal secret files. This decision was calculated. By keeping the reports in his secret files rather than official channels, Eisenhower preserved his option to protect Patton while maintaining the evidence necessary to remove him if circumstances required. It was a masterclass in command flexibility under pressure. Eisenhower's decision to handle the slapping incidents through administrative action rather than court-martial was not simply an act of friendship or favoritism. It reflected a cold calculation about winning the war. The Supreme Commander understood that modern warfare at the operational level required specific talents that were rare even among professional military officers. Strategic planning could be taught. Logistics could be mastered through study and experience. But the ability to maintain relentless offensive pressure, to sense when enemy resistance was cracking and exploit that moment ruthlessly, to inspire soldiers to achieve what they thought impossible. These qualities were inherent to certain commanders and absent in others. Patton possessed these qualities to an exceptional degree. His performance in North Africa, where he had taken command of the Sekou Corps after Kasserine and immediately restored its fighting spirit, demonstrated his ability to transform demoralized units into effective combat forces. His diplomacy with Vichy French forces in Morocco had prevented a potential bloodbath during the torch landings. His conduct of the Sicily campaign had been textbook mobile warfare. These achievements were not luck or circumstance. They reflected genuine military genius, applied at the operational level. Eisenhower also considered the German perspective. Through signals intelligence, the Allies knew that German commanders assessed enemy generals constantly, trying to predict Allied strategy based on who commanded specific operations. The Germans had identified Patton as exceptionally dangerous after Sicily. They studied his tactics and feared his aggressiveness. If Patton suddenly disappeared from Allied command structure, German intelligence would notice immediately and correctly conclude he had been removed for disciplinary reasons. This would eliminate the psychological advantage his reputation provided. The Supreme Commander faced pressure from multiple directions. Secretary of War Henry Stimson and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall would need to be informed, and both would have opinions about proper handling of the situation. The press corps covering the Sicily campaign already knew about the incidents through the military grapevine. Eisenhower met with war correspondents and explained the situation candidly. He told them Patton was indispensable to the war effort and asked them to suppress the story for the sake of Allied operations. The correspondents agreed to an informal compact. Damari Bess of the Saturday Evening Post assured Eisenhower that reporters were Americans first and correspondents second. They understood that publishing the story would create a public relations crisis that could force Patton's removal regardless of military necessity. Every mother in America would worry her son might be next to face Patton's wrath. The political pressure would be irresistible. So the reporters, including Ernie Pyle, who knew every detail, wrote nothing about the incidents. It was an extraordinary act of journalistic self-restraint driven by wartime solidarity. But Eisenhower knew this silence could not last forever. Someone would eventually break the story, either through patriotic duty or competitive pressure. When that happened, he needed to have taken clear corrective action. This explained his requirement that Patton apologize personally to both soldiers, to the medical staff who witnessed the incidents, and to every division under his command. The apologies would demonstrate that Patton had been punished and had accepted responsibility for his actions. They would provide political cover when the inevitable firestorm erupted. Eisenhower also informed General Marshall about the incidents in carefully worded correspondence. He praised Patton's achievements in Sicily while noting that he continued to exhibit unfortunate personal traits. Eisenhower explained the corrective measures he had ordered and expressed confidence that Patton would modify his behavior because he was avid for recognition as a great military commander. The message to Marshall was clear. Patton remained valuable despite his flaws, and Eisenhower had handled the situation without need for intervention from Washington. The decision to protect Patton carried risks that Eisenhower understood completely. If Patton committed another public indiscretion, Eisenhower's own judgment would be questioned. If the slapping incidents became public before Patton had proven his continued value through battlefield success, the political backlash could damage the War Department and Allied unity. Eisenhower was betting his reputation and potentially his command on Patton's ability to control himself long enough to justify the protection he was receiving. Patton's response to Eisenhower's letter revealed the complex psychology of a brilliant but deeply flawed commander. He composed a reply dated August 29th that expressed remorse about the incidents while simultaneously defending his underlying philosophy. Patton argued that combat exhaustion was often malingering, that weak soldiers infected others with their cowardice, and that harsh discipline was necessary to maintain fighting effectiveness. He apologized for his methods while insisting his intentions were correct. It was a response that demonstrated Patton understood he had crossed a line without truly grasping why his actions were wrong. The required apologies to his divisions became an ordeal for Patton. Standing before thousands of soldiers between August 24th and 30th, he gave carefully prepared speeches praising their combat performance while admitting he had sometimes been too harsh. He made only vague references to the specific incidents, never fully acknowledging what he had done. The speeches were humiliating for a general who prided himself on projecting absolute confidence and authority, but they were also revealing. When Patton appeared before the 3rd Infantry Division to deliver his final apology, the soldiers began chanting, "No, General, no, no," to prevent him from continuing. Their supportive reaction demonstrated that many frontline troops sympathized with Patton's tough approach to discipline, even when his specific actions had been excessive. Eisenhower used the apologies to demonstrate that corrective action had been taken, but he also began positioning Patton for future operations in ways that would maximize his strengths while minimizing opportunities for further incidents. The plan was elegant in its psychology. Rather than giving Patton a prominent combat command for the invasion of Italy, which would expose him to continued press scrutiny and opportunities for controversy, Eisenhower essentially sidelined him in Sicily. Patton remained in nominal command of 7th Army, but that army was systematically stripped of its divisions as they were reassigned to other operations. Patton spent months in isolated splendor at the palace in Palermo, much like Napoleon on Elba. This period of exile served multiple purposes. It allowed time for the slapping incidents to fade from immediate memory. It kept Patton away from situations where he might create new controversies, and it set up his eventual deployment in a role that would prove invaluable: deception. When planning for Operation Overlord intensified in early 1944, Allied intelligence needed the Germans to believe the invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. The deception plan, Operation Fortitude, required a credible threat to Calais that would convince German intelligence to keep strong forces there, even after the Normandy landings began. Patton was perfect for this role precisely because the Germans considered him so dangerous. Allied intelligence assigned him to command the 1st United States Army Group, a phantom force that existed only as radio traffic, dummy installations, and false intelligence reports. German agents reported that Patton was training a massive army in southeastern England. German reconnaissance photographed inflatable tanks and plywood landing craft that appeared real from the air, and German intelligence concluded that wherever Patton was positioned, that was where the main Allied attack would come. The deception worked brilliantly, helping ensure the success of D-Day by keeping German reserves away from Normandy for crucial weeks after the invasion. Eisenhower's handling of the slapping incidents demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both military and political realities. He had protected an invaluable combat commander while extracting maximum utility from an unfortunate situation. Patton's exile in Sicily and subsequent use in deception operations bought time for the controversy to fade while maintaining his availability for future combat command. When Patton finally returned to action leading 3rd Army in France in August 1944, he validated every argument Eisenhower had made about his indispensability. His breakout from Normandy and race across France were textbook examples of mobile warfare that justified the risks Eisenhower had taken to preserve his career. But the cost of protecting Patton was significant. His removal from consideration for command of ground forces in Overlord meant that position went to Montgomery, whose cautious approach would frustrate American commanders throughout the Northwest Europe campaign. Patton was passed over for command of the 12th Army Group, which went to Omar Bradley, his former subordinate. These decisions reflected the political reality that Patton's behavior had consequences, even when Eisenhower protected him from court-martial. On November 21, 1943, radio commentator Drew Pearson shattered the carefully maintained silence about the slapping incidents. During his Sunday evening broadcast, Pearson revealed that General George Patton had struck a hospitalized soldier in Sicily. describing it as a brutal assault by a high-ranking officer against a defenseless enlisted man. Pearson claimed the story as his own scoop despite the fact that dozens of correspondents had known about the incidents for months. His broadcast ignited exactly the firestorm Eisenhower and the war correspondents had feared. Congressional reaction was swift and intense. Representative Jed Johnson of Oklahoma called Patton's actions despicable and demanded explanation for why he remained in command. Representative Charles Hoven of Iowa, himself a combat veteran, declared that tyrants like Patton had no place in the American military. Newspaper editorial pages across the country condemned the incidents. Some compared Patton to authoritarian European generals who brutalized their own soldiers. The criticism cut across political lines, with both liberal and conservative voices expressing outrage. What complicated the political response was the perception that the Army and Eisenhower had attempted a cover-up by suppressing the story for months. Pearson and his supporters argued that the American public had a right to know about Patton's behavior, and that keeping the incidents secret represented a betrayal of democratic principles. This argument resonated with many citizens who distrusted military authority and worried about generals who operated without civilian oversight. The fact that Patton remained in command seemed to prove that the military protected its own, regardless of misconduct. Secretary of War Henry Stimson found himself defending the War Department's handling of the situation. On November 25th, Thanksgiving Day, he told reporters that he was aware of only one slapping incident initially and was awaiting a full report from Eisenhower. His statements were technically accurate, but failed to calm the controversy. Stimson knew he was walking a political tightrope. He had to defend the Army's decision to retain Patton while acknowledging that the general's behavior had been unacceptable. The balance was delicate, and the political risks were substantial. Behind the scenes, Eisenhower and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall worked to manage the crisis. Marshall sent a message to Eisenhower that captured the War Department's position perfectly. He stated he had been considering the matter on a purely business basis. The effect on Eisenhower's command, on troop confidence, and on public faith in the War Department had to be weighed against one unmistakable fact. Patton was the only available Army commander with actual experience fighting Rommel and conducting extensive amphibious operations, followed by rapid campaigns of exploitation. Marshall's assessment reflected the military establishment's fundamental calculation. Winning the war required commanders who could execute complex operations successfully. Patton had proven he possessed that capability. No other American general had his combination of experience, tactical skill, and aggressive instinct. From a purely military standpoint, removing Patton would weaken Allied offensive capabilities at a critical moment. Marshall was willing to weather political criticism to preserve that military advantage. Stimson echoed this reasoning in a letter to Congress. He stated that Patton must be retained because of the need for his aggressive, winning leadership in the bitter battles yet to come before final victory. The phrasing was deliberate. Stimson was arguing that saving American lives in future combat justified accepting Patton's flawed character. This utilitarian calculation appealed to many Americans who prioritized victory over perfect conduct from their generals. Others found it morally troubling, arguing that no military objective justified overlooking assault against subordinates. The public reaction was divided. Many soldiers and veterans supported Patton, arguing that war demanded tough discipline and that critics who had never faced combat could not understand the pressures of command. Some families of soldiers actually defended Patton, including Herman Kool, father of the soldier Patton had slapped on August 3rd. Kool wrote to Washington stating that Patton should be allowed to continue fighting and that his son bore no grudge. This support from the actual victim complicated the narrative that Pearson and Patton's critics were promoting. But many Americans remained outraged, particularly mothers who worried that any general who would strike one soldier might strike others. The incidents touched a nerve about military authority and the treatment of ordinary soldiers by elite officers. Editorials questioned whether the Army valued generals more than enlisted men, whether officers operated under different rules than soldiers, and whether military necessity could excuse any behavior, regardless of how abusive. Ultimately, Eisenhower's decision to protect Patton survived the political storm. Patton remained available for combat command, and when he finally led Third Army in France in 1944, his spectacular success vindicated the choice. His relief of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge became one of the most celebrated operations of the war, demonstrating exactly why Eisenhower had considered him indispensable. What Eisenhower said when Patton was about to be fired was simple. I cannot spare this man. He fights, and Eisenhower was proven right.